Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's special webinar, Going for Gold, Communicating the Olympic Games in a Pandemic, which incidentally is our last webinar of this season. So it's great. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in for this one. This webinar is presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. My name is Meredith Dalt. I'm a business journalist at Smith School of Business, and I am your host today. So before I introduce our special guest, I want to remind you, as I always do, that this conversation will be recorded. You'll be getting a link to the recording in your inbox in the next few days. I also want to invite you to ask questions early and often. Today's webinar has a slightly different format in that we're not having a presentation. It's not a panel discussion. This will actually just be a conversation between me and our guest. And I really hope that you, our audience, will get involved by asking questions early and often, and we'll get those questions into the conversation. You can ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please get involved. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce today's special guest, Thomas Hall, who's the Director of Communications and Media Relations with the Canadian Olympic Committee. He not only leads the COC's communications function, he also develops and implements the department's long-term strategy while managing the day-to-day communications needs of the world-leading National Olympic Committee. Tom has a diverse background in journalism and sport management. He holds a Master of Journalism from Carleton University and is currently completing his EMBA Americas at the Smith School of Business, making him one of us. For 15 years, he represented Canada as a member of the national sprint canoe team, winning a bronze medal at the 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing. Tom Hall, it's really wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So for people who may not be fully versed in you and your background in the Olympics, short of me mentioning, the 15 years, do you want to talk to us a little bit about some of that, just bring us up to speed so we're all on the same page about who you are as an Olympian, and just to set the stage a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was on the team representing Canada for a long time. I started in sport, like a lot of kids, playing all sorts of different sports. I had tons of energy. So it was the get this young boy out of the house tactic by my parents, and wound up falling in love with canoe, which for those of you who don't know, a quick Google of C1 1,000 meters Beijing 2008 will find you something in a foreign language, but it probably will be my race, and you can see exactly what this strange sport is. For me, what I truly loved about it was the fact that basically it's going as fast as you can in a straight line. And
in a tiny boat. We're not talking
tiny boat. Yeah,
like
yeah.
the ones you go to the cottage in. I mean,
oh yeah, totally different. Yeah, and there is a lot of strategy involved in all the rest, but it's also well suited to people who can go hard and enjoy that kind of effort. So my race was 1,000 meters, which is roughly 4 minutes, very similar to running a 4-minute mile or something like that. You go as hard as you possibly can and hope you last. So I was on the team. I had an up and down career, lots of exciting moments, lots of hard moments. Sport certainly teaches you a whole bunch of things that we can probably talk about in a bit. But the culmination of my career was really 2008 Beijing. But there were a couple other highlights along the way, and it feels like a lifetime ago. But yeah, tons of fun.
Well, tell us about that moment. I mean, that's kind of what like 15 years culminating in the medal. Because did you retire not long ago?
No, sadly, I continued for another 4 years and didn't make it to London. But the first, it did culminate there for sure. That's everyone's dream, right? Is to make it to the games. That was my original goal, and then to actually wind up on the podium was just absolutely insane. So that was the culmination.
What did that feel like? What does standing on an Olympic podium feel like? It's not every day that we get to ask.
Yeah, this is a good question. It's a hard one to answer. There's a weird level of satisfaction, maybe. Like, this is the thing about sport that I love, and maybe not everyone does, and it's what I loved about being a journalist too. I spent quite a bit of time at Canadian Geographic, and so the link between sport and anyone who's really passionate about something is the kind of wild commitment to something that's probably not going to happen. And that's what I think, at least, and I find that fascinating. And so that's what it was with sport. Was like, I devoted, a total more than 20 years of my life to this sport. with the hope that maybe one day I'll wind up on this podium. And it's a very, so the fact that I actually did was incredible. I won't say I was surprised, but there are these moments where it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is just incredible. And so the moment itself was, you shed a little tear. I was fortunate that my family was there and I could wave and see them. It was a real, there were a lot of ups and downs in my career. That was the only time I raced that race at a senior level internationally, was at the Olympic Games, at a World Championships or Olympics. And so I was a bit of a long shot, and it was truly a special moment, and certainly one I'll never forget.
Do you keep your Olympic medal close by at all
It
times?
is right.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh, come now. I think we need to, yeah. If I had an Olympic medal, I feel like I would keep it on my person.
Yeah. So here's what you get. So you get this nice box. So Beijing 2008. This comes in this travel box, and you open that up, and then there's the medal.
Oh, there's the medal.
And yeah. So here it is. So
wow.
To be honest, I'm soon to be 40 years old. This lived in my mom's, in my mom's dresser for most of my post-Olympic medal winning life. But I had to bring it to Ottawa when I moved here. And so on the front, you've got Nike, so Greek goddess Nike. And on the back, every front of a Summer Olympic medal is the same. Here's a neat fact. And on the back, the host country can do something unique. And so for Beijing, they inlaid it with jade, which is kind of cool. Yeah, the thing with a medal that I find really neat is this is not something that physically is that important to me. Obviously, it's about this journey that you're on and the time that you spend with all the people that help get you there. But the cool thing with this and the true power comes from, like, when you go to a school and you can pass this around to kids, and this thing has passed through thousands of hands. It probably needs a wash. It is truly special. That's one of my, all-time favorite moments, for sure. So anyway.
I was like, thank you for showing that. I couldn't let you get away without showing.
Yeah, no problem.
So how does your experience, I mean, I can only think that kind of drive, doing the same thing, pursuing the same goal doggedly for such a long time, has got to impact your ability, your career, and you now work for the Olympic Committee. Like, how does being a former Olympian help you in your current role?
It's interesting. So there's a few things, and maybe the least obvious is a deep appreciation for both the role that luck plays in everything we do, and I'll elaborate on that in a second. And then the second is not being afraid to ask for help. I think the other layer on, and I'll start with the second one, the other layer on that is I'm dyslexic. So I have a learning disability. I couldn't read till grade 5. I love stories all the time, but basically, sport was my outlet for energy, right? And it was a place where I felt valued. And certainly it helped give me the confidence I needed to be vulnerable, to ask for help. God bless my parents. At a time where they could barely afford it, they got me help all through elementary school and high school. That certainly without that, I wouldn't be here today. And sport was the other side of that coin, right? So struggling in school, banging my head against the wall with math and frankly English, and and then at the same time winning the Junior World Championships. It was this weird dichotomy throughout my whole life. And so, but they connect in this area where you can't be a successful athlete without support, and you can't go it alone. Though I raced singles most of my career, you're not alone there. There's a coach, there's a family, there's a whole network of support that's super important. And for me, even in this job today, and we can get into this in a little more detail, there's parts of this role that I'm super qualified for, and there's others where going into an Olympic year, I started this job in February. I was working close to it. I started it in February, and to support me, my manager Andrew brought on two of the most experienced Olympic Games communicators in Canada, Sylvie Bigra and Caroline Sharp, who I think combined have gone to more than 30 Olympic Games. And they're on as mentors for me. And I work with them on all sorts of stuff, from messaging to strategy and how we're going to do this. And I think it's really important to be able to ask for help and to be, to acknowledge that we don't know everything, particularly in comms, where some things are really subjective. And if you can get more voices around the table to help you think through issues or think through plans, it's incredibly powerful.
Can I
So
stop you just for a minute, Tom?
yeah, of course.
Can you give us a real sense of what your job actually is? Because it's comms, but to what, like communications, but to what end? Are you in charge of everything? Like, what are you doing?
No, yeah, no, God. No, so the comms function, the Canadian Olympic Committee is a really interesting organization in that we are, so we're private, not-for-profit. We are 98% privately funded through corporate partners and our foundation. Most of that money flows back into the Canadian sports system. I think the unique thing about us is, at least for me, is so we've got this whole corporate comm side that many of the people on this conference are probably really familiar with. And so that's the general kind of communications role. Then you have your internal comms or your internal kind of stakeholders and that role that's really important. Obviously, the partnership role is the partners and communicating with partners like Smith is super crucial and fundamental to that kind of central pillar of corporate comms. But then we have this whole other thing, the sports side and the Olympics, and actually, like, you know, our mission really is to make Canada and the world better through sport, right? This is what we believe sport's about. This is what we believe the movement is about. But at a really practical level, our job is to get, you know, 400 athletes and 500 mission staff to the games every 2 years to perform at the Olympics for Canada. And so we have this stakeholder. Our sports stakeholder map is 60 organizations, multiple levels in each organization that we have to work with, 1,800 plus athletes, you know, start numbering the coaches and all the rest. It's an incredibly diverse group, all with diverse backgrounds and their own diverse stakeholders, including their own boards of directors and things like that we have to work with. So, you know, the comms function at the COC is actually more about PR, media management, planning for communications of the games, and helping, frankly, to tell the story of the COC. Then we work super closely, hand in glove, with our digital team that does stuff like the @Team Canada channels, which I highly suggest you follow if you're not already following them going into the games. They do a phenomenal job of bringing the games home. And so we work with them, obviously, but there's kind of that bucket, the fan-facing bucket, and then we're kind of more the corporate bucket.
Right. Okay. Amazing. Very thorough. So many questions still standing. I understand one of the things that you've been behind is a video that you were going to share with us, maybe to pump the audience up, pump us all up for the Olympics. Maybe you can give us some context for it. And then we are starting to get some questions from the audience. So so if you want to just like set the scene for the video, we'll stream the video, and then we'll get to some questions.
Glory from Anywhere. So we just launched this brand campaign a few weeks ago. It's, you know what? Why don't we play the video and then I'll talk to it, because there's a neat kind of twist that's happened here. So let's play the video and we can talk about it after that.
Okay, so we have our behind the scenes person's going to prep the video. Here we go.
Glory is a girl who has worked 24 years for a 2-second leap of faith. A father who has dedicated his life to saving lives. It's two competitors from two different worlds who came together to take on the world. Glory is a teacher who changed the lives of countless students, and a skater who mastered her sport while getting her master's. A coach who went from fighting for herself to fighting for her community. Glory is an athlete who spent 11 years perfecting 10 events, all to chase one dream. Inside all of us lives the potential for glory.
Whoa, thanks. As I laughed to you, Tom, earlier, I mean, I just feel like I went, oh my gosh, what am I doing glory-wise? But it's great to get jazzed up about all the ways we can contribute. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the approach with this?
Yeah, so what's super fun about that video is that it was conceived and actually shot before the pandemic. And so when you watch it, you think, okay, COC is leaning into the pandemic here. That we've got a firefighter, we have a teacher, we have a community coach, and you can read their profiles, gloryfromanywhere.ca. Those are real people. Our community here. Yeah, those are real people, not actors. We call them our community heroes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we went out with our agency, Camp Jefferson, to find people. And I'm not taking credit for this. This was not comms, it's our brand team, but telling the story here. And they like, it is brilliant. And we looked at it from, okay, we've gone through this pandemic. We're going to launch this for Tokyo. Does it still make any sense? And we just sat there and watched it. We're like, it makes more sense. Like, this is the story. So it's about more than winning medals, more than records. It's how people carry themselves, overcome obstacles, and strive to be their best. And I think, that obviously has some new meaning in the pandemic. And for us, it's these finding the inspirational Canadians who are all around us, and celebrating those stories. And it's what I alluded to off the top around, what I personally find really interesting is just people who are passionate, or people who are driven to do something that's different, or is for the betterment of all of us, and they put themselves out there and try something risky. That's worth its weight in gold. I mean, God, we can always use more of that. And so that's what I think this campaign's about. Personally, that's what I get from it. So.
That's amazing. Thank you. So speaking of the Tokyo Games, people are talking about the fact that there has been another state of emergency declared in Japan. We already know the games are a year delayed. Any other context we need? Now, I've got some really good questions from the audience about these games. Do you want to just set the scene for this year's games, kind of what some of the issues are that you're kind of keeping on front of mind, and then?
Yeah, so I think it's always a headline versus what's actually happening on the ground. I think the state of emergency, this is the fourth that Japan's issued throughout the pandemic. So it sounds really grave, and not to downplay anything. Obviously, everyone is highly concerned about COVID, and we can talk about all the precautions that we're taking. And our focus as the Olympic Committee bringing people to Tokyo is like the safety of the people of Japan, the safety of Team Canada, and the safety of our communities when we come home. Like, those are paramount in this games. But a state of emergency in Japan is is less locked down than we are in Ontario right now. That's where I am. So movie theaters are open, restaurants are open. I think they have to close at 8 p.m. There's no alcohol being served, but otherwise it's life as normal. And you can follow some of the reporters who are on the ground there, and it's like the cities are packed. It's Yonge and Dundas on the busiest day is what it looks like in downtown Tokyo right now. And though the case count is climbing, there's 38 million people in Tokyo, and I think there's still just under 1,000 cases a day or something. So, when you put it into context of what Canada is like, and some of the precautions we're taking or not taking, I think it changes that dynamic. Again, that is not to downplay what's happening there. We're taking it super seriously, and are in constant communication with TOCOG, so the Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee, and of course the IOC. They are working with the WHO, as well as their own medical teams, to come up with what they've called the playbooks, Tokyo 2020 playbooks, as well as Team Canada has its own that are where we've divided people into nodes. So I leave for Tokyo next Thursday. I arrive, multiple tests in the airport, multiple tests before I leave, have to be negative, multiple tests in the airport, 3-day locked in my hotel room quarantine. And then for 14 days, I am only allowed to travel between my hotel and the main press center where I'll work out of. And that's it. And they literally are, they're watching you, and not that they have to. We're like fully on board with all of this, because it's not about us and our comfort. It's about the athletes and their performance and people's safety. And so the measures, the countermeasures they're taking are truly unprecedented. And so everything we're doing on top of that has been guided by our chief medical officer, who has just guided all of our plans, detailed everything that we're doing, come up with all the different precautions we're taking on the ground. So.
Okay. Wow. So does that mean you can't even sneak away to watch the canoe heats or anything?
No, I mean, so the thing with canoeing is that it is the second week. So I probably won't go to watch the games because I have a job to do, but I would love to be able to watch my race and even from a distance see my friends. I still know a whole bunch of the people on the canoe circuit. So, but no, I don't think I don't think that'll happen. But that's fine. Like there's a narrative growing, and we can talk about narratives around the Olympics. There's a narrative out there right now that's the no fun Olympics, right? People are saying this, and they say, oh, it's not gonna be any fun. And reporters are tweeting about it on, on Twitter, and here was my experience in China. 3 weeks, in a hotel room, slightly bigger than the room I'm in now. I didn't stay in the village because our venue was outside of the village. So 3 weeks there, 5 minutes from our race course. My day consisted of waking up, eating breakfast, going to the course to train or race, coming back, eating lunch, going back to the course, and in between I was in my room. It wasn't like, it's not a party when you're there. I was there to do the most important job of my life up to that point. And it's the same for all of our athletes. And I raced. There were a couple races. Hungary is a huge canoe fan base, so there were races like that where there would be fans there. But it's the same thing. Like, no fans in the stands. It's awful for the people of Japan. It's awful for the fans. But for an athlete, sure, it's nice to have people there. But we're there to do a job, and there's a world where, yes, you want them there, but frankly, I'm going to put my head down and you're in so much pain that you don't even know anyone's there anyway in a canoe race. So it's an interesting narrative that I think is important to highlight, that I think it depends who it's no fun for. And it's one thing if it's no fun for those of us whose job is to tell the story of the games, but it's a totally different thing for the people who are actually there to perform and do their jobs.
So related, I want to ask this question from Anne Hébert, who's in the audience. So she said, there's a lot of conflict going into these games. I'm an Olympic junkie, usually glued to the games for 2 weeks, but I'm also very conflicted about these games, given what is happening in Japan. How will this impact your communications strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so our whole communications strategy is all very different, and it's all focused on safety and bubbles and ensuring that there's no unnecessary physical contact. From the things that the COC has done, we're sending a much smaller mission team to Japan, where we've canceled Canada Olympic House, which is truly a lot of fun and generally the hub for Canadians at the games. We've developed this node system that I spoke about to keep athletes and just to absolutely minimize any unnecessary physical contact between people. So from a comm standpoint, navigating that, our stakeholders are in each of these bubbles. There's a village bubble, there's a this in between village bubble, and then there's those of us on the outside. Who can't interact with those other people really face to face. And so and those are our main spokespeople. So working with them using platforms like Zoom to help us tell the story is one element. And then the other piece is a huge part of our job at games is to work with press and to ensure that they're able to tell the story of the games and to service them. They're a big client group of ours, and one of our functional areas is devoted to that. And so helping them tell the story is also top of mind. So how do we do our press conferences virtually? How do we ensure that they're getting access to athletes? CBC Radio Canada is one of our partners in telling this story. They're streaming more Olympic content back home, I think, than ever before. It's all over the GEM app, which is going to be pretty cool. But even with them working out, how can we do this and how can we give people the stories that they want to hear is a huge piece of this whole puzzle.
Yeah. So here's a good question from the audience. Is it not an option to delay the games for another year, to have a safe event, allowing family and friends of athletes to attend? As spectators of the games, what don't we understand?
To delay the games again would just be impossible. I mean, with everything that Japan has put into place already, they are ready to host. I think that we do believe that they can be hosted safely. And then the other piece is Beijing is around the corner. In 7 months, we're at the Beijing Olympics, which is also going to be its own challenge given some of the lingering COVID restrictions and all the rest that we're planning. But again, it's what are the games about? And for me as an athlete who competed there, it was lovely to have my family there. That was truly special, but that wasn't it, right? Most of my races were without them, and though that's a nice thing to have, personally, I would have still performed the same way, and the moments I had at home after are just as meaningful, if not more meaningful. So I think it's a great conversation, but it's just not possible. And again, the guidance from the WHO, the guidance from our medical team is that we can do this safely. It's going to be challenging. People are going to have to be super patient, but that it's doable, it's safe, and that should do it. So.
Okay, thanks. Cindy Huang writes, how do you anticipate social media fatigue will come into play with the year that we've had online, if at all? I mean, you talked about all these apps and everything on GEM, and we're glued to our computers all day for life and work and socializing. Do you think social media fatigue is going to play into this?
For spectators and fans, I don't know. I mean, I'm getting tired of Netflix between the NBA and a busy work schedule. I still think I've managed to watch basically the entire catalog, but for this is, if nothing else, I think this will be energizing. There's it's truly, this is going to be fun. It's going to be new. It's going to be exciting to watch and exciting to follow. There's an element where for athletes, that's a really valid question, right? Are athletes sitting in social media? How is that going to affect them? But they work with their mental performance consultants on their team who help provide them with strategies and things to mitigate that kind of stress. But yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, that's good to know, I guess. Are athletes expected to do a certain amount of their, like, are they expected to kind of have social media presences given that they're not going to have fans in the stands?
Yeah, well, we encourage athletes to, share their story however they want to, frankly, at games. So whether they want to do that on social media, it's a really personal decision. So we don't pressure athletes to do anything. This is up to them in terms of what they want their presence to be online. If they do want to be online, we often amplify those from our digital channels, but that's up to an athlete. And I think it's a really individual decision. You'll see some just go into blackout mode. They say, I'm offline from, let's say game next week till August 9th. I'm not going to look at social media. Well, others, it's part of the routine, and that's what keeps them grounded and comfortable. And so they'll be on it.
Right. Okay. Did the postponement year give the COC any kind of advantage, in a sense, to kind of figure out the communication strategy or figure out how to tackle things?
I wouldn't say from a comm standpoint, I don't think so. I don't, in terms of, it's been a huge challenge for everyone. And I think, so one of the big challenges of telling the story of these games, I think, is the uncertainty that's part of this, right? All along, it's been uncertain, and there's been rumors after rumors after rumors. What does all this mean? What is, and so uncertainty is a really hard thing to communicate. I think, any communications professional on this channel knows the importance of narrative, and people like a button-up narrative. And the idea that there isn't a button-up narrative, or there hasn't always been one, or that it is, we're being guided by experts. Here's the exact situation right now. And, if it changes, we'll let you know. That is unsatisfying for people, even though it's the truth. And I think that has been difficult for people to grasp. And from a comm standpoint and messaging standpoint, that can be, difficult to share, because our job, we want to work with media and to help them tell the stories they want to tell. That's, fundamental. Lots of my friends are journalists, and so sometimes it feels unsatisfying, but that is, that's just the reality of the situation. Those are the facts of it. So uncertainty is a real big challenge to communicate, and has been, and the rate of change, right? Things have been just changing, and there's one area that is really challenging that doesn't get thought a lot about. I talked about our stakeholders, and so informing, there was in January, I think there was this rumor that floated, and I think it was a leak from an opposition party member or something at the time, that the games were going to be canceled, or the games had been canceled, and it was about to be announced or something like that. And I got texts from athletes training, and they were devastated by that rumor, and it was brutal, and it was completely unsubstantiated. It passed around everywhere. And so when things like that, you wake up and you get that, ping on your phone, it's heartbreaking, and you have to try really hard to get the messages, the facts out as quickly as you can. And that throughout this process has been top of mind for me. I have a lot of friends competing there from different countries, and I'm just so conscious that our job is really to try to be at least a source of truth on this as quickly as we can be.
Right. Oh, yikes. That's challenging. I mean, even the delay, I've definitely heard of athletes who, went ahead and thought they were going to retire, went ahead and kind of got on with their life, and then whoops, no, actually you're going to compete.
Yeah.
Like what a upheaval.
So my previous role was working closely with Smith on a program called Game Plan, right? So that's an athlete wellness program. and truly tons of fun to work on. And when this happened, it was immediately we identified, so for context, I guess we work on health, athlete transition, and things like that. So athlete wellness, so that they can perform better on the field of play by taking care of things off the field of play, trying to remove stress from their lives. A huge thing was right away, okay, well, what athletes, what athletes were affected by this to the point where that's the end of their Olympic dream or their career? Maybe they've already gone to games, maybe they haven't, but it's over. Then the other piece was, okay, what athletes are on the fence? And then finally, what athletes are, okay and will continue on for another year, tend to be younger in their careers. And so across those three categories, it was identifying who they are and what we can do for them to support them through the year. So yeah, it's certainly been challenging, no doubt.
And somebody asks, are there Canadian athletes who are not attending because of COVID? And do you know, have the competition from other countries has decreased due to COVID?
Honestly, I can't think of any athletes that aren't attending due to COVID or fear of COVID. Again, like what's going to happen on the ground in Tokyo for the athletes is they've been basically living in bubbles for the past year, in their training bubbles and things like that for the past year in Canada. So it's going to be a very natural thing. So it's frequent testing, minimal physical interaction unless you're in your bubble and things like that. So yeah, again, and we've been clear, another important piece of communication is ensuring that they're as aware as possible of everything that's happening, that they're able to connect with their team doctors, and that those team doctors are informed.
Right.
So yeah.
And we're presuming everyone is double vaxxed going in.
The vast majority of our team is going to be double vaxxed. Our entire mission team is going to be double vaxxed. There's a few athletes that we know who just can't be double vaxxed because of their competition schedule. Some are racing in the Tour de France, so they got their first vaccine, and it's not like they're going to take a vaccine in the middle of the tour. No. That said, all of our planning and why it's so extreme was started a year ago and was under the assumption no one would be vaccinated. And we were confident we could do this like that. But right now the IOC expects, I think it's 80 or 90% of the village to be fully vaccinated, and the rest to be, I think, one dose or something like that. It's pretty incredible. But regardless, all of the rules are still assuming physical distancing, keeping people apart unless totally necessary.
Right. Okay. Speaking of athletes on the ground, Katrina Gallus writes, "Hi, Tom. Building on the leadership position Canada took in the Games postponement, what's the current state of how you've prepared athletes on current issues, Rule 40, 50, et cetera, so they can continue to role model this leadership while on the ground in Tokyo?"
Yeah. Hi, Katrina. Thanks for the question. I think this, for context, Rule 40 is around corporate messaging, so how an athlete can thank their sponsor during the games. Rule 50 is around protest and protest, religious symbols, and things like that. So one of the challenges that I think the International Olympic Committee has become really front and center for me is how complex an organization it is. So 206 national Olympic committees are represented in the IOC, which is more than the UN. So the belief is that by bringing people together for 2 weeks in peace, that there's some inherent value in that, especially in the world as fractured as it is today. And I fully am on board with that. I fully believe that, and I believe that's incredibly powerful. But the reality is, on the ground, there are countries that are at war with each other, right? And so you have these groups living in the village in this confined space together. And so you have to have some sort of guidelines for what's appropriate and what's not, and what is in line with the Olympic Charter and the Olympic spirit. And that's what Rule 50 is. Now, Rule 50 has been getting tons of attention because of athletes taking a knee on the field of play and things like that. The Canadian Olympic Committee's Athlete Commission, so this is a group of athletes elected by their peers to represent them at the IOC, to sit on our board of directors. We're in frequent communication with them. They surveyed our athletes to find out what their feelings were around Rule 50 and placing some limits to where and how an athlete can protest. So this really is now exclusive to the Olympic podium, the athlete village, and the field of play during competition. So that whole piece is is really interesting. Our athletes voted, I think 70% or so said we need to have some areas that are quote unquote sacred or protected, but where we can loosen the rules to allow freedom of expression on things that are in line with the Olympic spirit. So right, advocating for human rights and things like that. We should try to move the needle. And they made recommendations to the IOC's Athlete Commission, and about a month ago, most of those recommendations were accepted. And then we just found out last week the IOC made some significant changes to Rule 50 that allow athletes even more areas to have their voice heard. Now, I think one of the things that isn't clear is like, so you're not allowed to protest on the podium, but you can literally walk off the podium 10 feet to the mix zone and say whatever you'd like right into the camera. You can say whatever you'd like on social media. You could during press conferences, pre-games meetings. So you do have loads of opportunities to share your whatever topic or issue you'd like to bring up. So for me, from a comms perspective, what we want to educate athletes about is, well, here are the risks. If you are going to protest, be aware of what the potential risks are. But more importantly, like, let's try to help you have a strategy for what you're doing, so that you can, whether it's you want to build your brand or whether it's you have a social justice issue you want to champion, let's think through how to do that so that you can maximize your potential at games, and that you are aware of the risks, if you're going to potentially violate the rule.
Wow. Okay. Yikes. I hadn't even thought about all of those things.
There's a lot. It's a wild time. Yeah.
Well, so it does beg the question, like that learning how to communicate for an event as large as this one. I mean, our audience comes from a variety of backgrounds, but are there any sort of key takeaways that you could touch on from that you've learned in communicating for an event as large as this one or as large as the Olympics that others might be able to draw on in their own marketing or communications efforts? Is there anything that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I talked about rate of change and uncertainty and some of those challenges before. I think fundamentally, the beauty for me of working at the COC and in this movement that I believe in is that the values are there, right? What's our purpose here? We know what our purpose is. And so when you're faced with uncertainty or faced with difficult decisions, being able to just take a step back and say, okay, like, before we start formulating, responses to these questions or coming up with plans, like why are we even here? What is it? And what do we believe is important? And then when you have those things that you can reflect on and focus on, it certainly gives you a chance to ground yourself before, before entering the maelstrom, whatever that is. But then there's the other pieces, and this is just, I think, basic, but never more important, is prepare. So like, we work on our key messages daily, whether we're getting media requests or not. We run through different scenarios, good and bad. What are we going to do if a gold medal is won unexpectedly? Who needs to know? How do we ensure that we get this story to Canadians as fast as we possibly can? How do we know that, how are we ensuring that media have an opportunity to speak to this person? How do we do all that? So like going through those scenarios, practicing, trying to account for as much as you can, but then sticking to a process level as well. So here are some issues that we know might be issues, but generally what's our process if good or bad things happen, I think is fundamental. And then, I come back to like, this idea of communications as a whole, what are we trying to do from a comm strategy? And it's telling a story. And if you lose sight of that, I think that's also really challenging. And so, thinking through what we need to give to media to help them tell the story they want to tell is really important to us. And then thinking through how we can support our athletes in that narrative and all the rest is also really important. So in terms of preparation, there's probably tens of thousands of words of documents prepared at this point. Our team does meet, we go through different scenarios, we practice those scenarios. We meet with all the teams we're going to work with and talk about who's going to do what, where, when, and why, and how. Go through our communications channels, make sure our spokespeople are well briefed on all the issues, the emerging issues, and all of those pieces, which you just have to do for something like this. And then it's also, you're kind of girding yourself to be ready for 24/7, right? It's 13 hours ahead in Japan. And
Right.
so that's kind of our time scale. We have a team back home that's working Node E, and then a team in Japan. So
I
yeah.
have a feeling you're not going to be sleeping a lot.
No, I don't think so.
Couple
Not
weeks.
too much. Yeah.
This person actually is talking about how games are communicated. This person has a very specific question, thinking back to the events surrounding the 1980 games in Moscow or the 1972 games in Munich, and how these games are remembered. How do you think these games will be remembered? Will they be games with an asterisk, given the compromised path to qualification in different COVID situations in all nations around the world? I think the question is, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a special, we're having a unique year, not unlike those other unique years.
It's certainly a unique year. I mean, these will be remembered as a very different games. They're 2021, right? Games happen. They were supposed to happen in 2020. There's no doubt that they'll be remembered as a different games. I think the things that, success for us, frankly, is getting Team Canada to and from the games safely, athletes being able to perform their best after an incredibly challenging year of training. We all heard stories of athletes training in their backyard pools attached to rubber bands so that they could do it. The different bubbles athletes have had to be in, the restrictions on travel, our swimmers being out of a pool for X number of months, which is unheard of in that sport, still breaking records at our trials, which is just incredible. So, for me, personally speaking, I think, yeah, getting the athletes to and from games safely, having them compete their best, whatever that is, and recognizing that these are games unlike anything else, and that the stories of resilience, that, the perseverance, triumph over adversity. And, for me, like I said off the top, in my own journey, the thing that interests me is people trying something incredibly hard and trying to succeed against odds. I lost 99% of my races. The canoe gods smiled upon me about 5 times in the 15 years I represented Canada. And I was lucky enough that one of those was during the games. But there are also incredible stories already coming out of these games. Canada will have, we're going to have our first trans judge, openly trans judge at the games, working at the games. We have women in canoe. So my sport, for the first time, women will race in that event at the Olympics. It's a long time coming.
Women have not raced in canoe before?
They've raced in kayak. I mean, my mom raced in canoe in the 50s, but at the Olympics, no, the women were racing in kayak. It's been a long time coming, and the IOC, this games is going to be the most gender equal. By Paris, it will be equal 50-50 split between men and women at the games. And the IOC has been driving this for a number of years and have basically told sports, if you don't do it, you're not allowed to be at the big stage. This is where we are now. We need to be doing this, right? And so it's an exciting time for sport, and this will be an important games for a number of reasons. But without a doubt, they're going to be an extraordinary challenging games for everybody, and that's going to be part of their story. And whether that's I still think the story is going to be positive. I think it's going to be those inspirational stories that are going to come out of it.
Right. A question from the audience. Do you know how much of an increase it's going to be to Canada to attend the Tokyo Olympics and abide by safe COVID precautions and protocols?
Funding wise?
Well, is there a cost increase to having to manage all this
Well,
effort?
so first of all, those are private dollars that are getting most of the team to the games. The federal government did kick in emergency funding for the national sport organizations, which that is emergency funding for everything from helping to get kids active to just keeping the lights on. Major events had to get canceled for some of our NSOs. So kudos to that, as all of us have experienced. Those are businesses that needed help and got it. We're I think from a budgetary standpoint, we're sending far less people to these games. So
how many fewer? Like what kind of difference are you talking about?
Well, I think our entire team is going to be about 800, and typically it would be, I mean, if you consider friends and family and all the rest, I mean, we're talking thousands typically, right? So those wouldn't all be on our payroll, obviously. Those are friends and family. But in terms of our staff, we've cut down staff by, I think, roughly 50%. I mean, I can find the exact number, but it's something like that. So it's significant decrease. We looked at everything, and the games team looked at everything and said, okay, well, what can we, what roles can be done from Canada safely that make sense, and what are essential on the ground. And so that's how we landed there.
So how does the communication strategy change as you get closer to the games, especially given that you're seeing, we're getting emergency orders and, every day things are changing? What does that mean for you guys as we get closer?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the interesting things about the Olympics that Olympic junkies would be well aware of, and people who follow this, is before every games, there are a handful of stories that always come out. Cost, so the cost of the overall games, the safety of the games, the level of preparedness of the host country, and then whatever domestic scandal is the story of the day. These are all real. These happen before every Olympics. Obviously, this one, COVID, is a different focus. It has a different level of focus. But so from a normal comm strategy thing, we would start to see these stories build up during kind of a vacuum that happens before the games, which is a lot of reporters are now on the beat. They're on the Olympic beat if they weren't already, and they're looking for content. And so, where they get that content, wherever they get it. But often the stories that are at the forefront are from, more of an anti-games lens, frankly. And it's difficult, there's so many good stories out there and good news stories out there that we want to tell, but frankly, we're busy trying to make the games happen, right? We're busy trying to just do our day-to-day operations so that we can land and be operational. So there's a bit of a vacuum that gets filled there. This games, we are consciously trying to tell some more stories that are really interesting about what happens behind the scenes, like the logistics of getting Team Canada to games and things like that were in the Globe and Mail. There's a couple stories coming out next week that are really interesting. So there is this strategy around, okay, how do we fill this void that tends to get filled with negative stories? And so that's a key piece approaching games. And then also, how do we get people excited about the athletes and try to bring the athletes home? And that's what our digital team does a really good job of doing. I think as of yesterday, 41 team announcements, 379 bios updated on our website with the team, 20 chef chats with Marnie McBean, who is our chef de mission and is just an absolute rock star.
Or Olympian also, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Olympic champion. Yeah, it needs no introduction. I mean,
well, some people just for context.
Boss. Yeah, sorry, I should have. Yeah, Marnie is just incredible, and so, the team. And I'd be remiss. I am not doing this alone. I talked about Sylvie and Caroline off the top, working as mentors for all of us. But there's me, there's Manny, Sam, Tara, Josh, that are kind of the comms team specifically. And the amount of stuff we've put out about the games that's just so exciting over the past month is just extraordinary. And yeah, so it's funny going to games. It's kind of like, okay, we're finally here and we're finally ready. But there's a few big things to come. The full team announcement is going to happen. Flag bearer announcement is going to happen. And then, of course, there's just tons of exciting stories that are going to come from the games. So.
Right. No one's talking about the outfits anymore, but we won't.
I mean, here's official Tokyo gear. Yeah.
Oh yeah, nice. You like that?
Yeah.
Melinda Knox asks, have your communications targets and KPIs or key performance indicators changed from previous games, given the unique situation for this year? What does communication success look like, and how is it different?
I think, yeah, that's a really great question. And the KPIs do change. And for us, we've gone through an enormous amount of change over the past 3 years as a comms department, and even me joining as comms director, just in February, is another big piece of change. So, in terms of our KPIs and how all that shifts, our typical games piece would be frankly less complicated because of COVID. So we would have different metrics and measures. I talked about earlier what success looks like, and it's awe-inspiring performances or stories of resilience and getting people home safely. And that for us from a comms perspective, wins are ensuring that we're able to tell the story of the games with our partner Radio Canada and CBC, and with the media that's on the ground at the games and at home. And in terms of KPIs, we do look at you know, how many impressions there are and all of those. You know, there's a very specific array of KPIs that we have with our digital team and those types of things. But it does change, right? The whole approach to these games is different and just can't, and of course it is, due to COVID. So for us, it's it's looking at, you know, just even the share of stories that we were excited to get out. How did those do? What did those look like? How are we able to amplify those? What lessons did we learn from operating virtually, right? Most of us are going to be in separate hotel rooms for a lot of this game. So it certainly changes your targets, right? You have to reset and be comfortable with, you know, certainly different outcomes than originally expected.
Right. Okay. Thanks. I'm going to ask you to put your future forward lens on right now. Alyssa Shivji asks, what are your thoughts about the future of the Olympics as the cost, financial, human, and environmental are so great? Even as we count down to Tokyo, there won't be fans. Stadium expenses are still incurred. Is it worth it for countries to host the Olympics in its current format? Would it be worth it for Canada?
I think so. Yes. Short answer, yes, it would be worth it. And this is another one of the challenges with games, right? The costs that get talked about a lot involve usually costs beyond the games. So this is major infrastructure projects that are being layered on by host cities. The games are a perfect time, I think, to say, okay, what's our city plan? What's our 30-year city plan or 20-year city plan, right? Every major city will have this. You can see what they are trying to accomplish in that time. Does hosting a games midway through this plan allow us to accelerate the light rail plans we had already? And does that allow us to get potentially more funding for it from other sources?
Like Vancouver.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so there have been games that I think we've seen negative stories about, and perhaps justifiably so. But for the most part, we are more than able to host a sustainable and responsible games in Canada. And to be clear, the IOC, again, like the new agenda 2020 plus 5, and I think it's just changed. It might be 2021 plus 5 is worth looking at. I mean, the controls for cost, for, you know, municipal buy-in, like they want people to be excited about the games. They don't want to go somewhere where people don't want the games. They want the game. I mean, sustainability is a number one. The IOC is planting, I think, I forget, they're calling it the IOC forest or something. They're planting millions of trees to offset the carbon that they can't help but produce, but they plan to be carbon neutral if they aren't already. I should actually know this. So, you know, the movement is super aware of the constraints, and sustainability is front and center. But the narratives exist, and people like to go back to things that happened decades ago, right? The games and or more recently, or the last decade, and use those as examples. But there's huge differences between hosting a games responsibly in Canada and potentially in some other countries that in the past weren't done responsibly. So.
Right. Thanks. So someone asks, speaking of negative stories, this one's very specific, but were you expecting that much backlash on the American runner who was disqualified for testing positive for using marijuana? And what were the behind the scenes discussions like in that case? We've got some great questions from the audience.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, it's a heartbreaking story. So for context, when I was on the national team, and this is true of any athlete on the national team who's identified as, you know, Olympic potential or competing internationally, is, you know, you sign the anti-doping agreement and you are kind of, here are all the rules. You have to go through, in Canada, you go through a video every year that updates you on the rules, how to search for what's banned, what's not. You know, recreational drug use is highlighted as something that isn't allowed. And then we kind of sign our lives away in terms of the anti-doping agency knew 24/7 where I was for my whole career, basically, on the national team. And I would be walking out the door at 8 p.m. and get a knock on the door, and it would be a dope tester. So, you know, my partner and I at that time, it would be, okay, movie's canceled. I went to the bathroom right before we left the house, and now I've got to wait to provide a urine sample. So let's sit on the couch and watch Netflix with, with the dope testers, and it's kind of like until you're ready to go, and that's just part of it. And so this story is heartbreaking. It's truly heartbreaking, but it's also, something that athletes are well aware of. And the risk with marijuana, which is particularly challenging, is that THC can last in your system for a really long time. And I remember this being a big issue when I was still competing, in 2012. So it's an awful, my heart goes out to her. You can read her take on it in the stories, and US track and field. She explained why she did it. She regrets it. And it is what it is. I think it's super unfortunate, but it does happen a lot. Now there has been advocacy for removing marijuana from the banned substance list. I am not an expert. People can argue back and forth whether there is a performance enhancing aspect to it, and keep in mind that performance enhancing isn't just giving you energy or steroids, but also can be relaxing you depending on the sport. And so, yeah, it's super challenging though.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my gosh, we still have questions from the audience. We are almost out of time. Tom, we could just keep going. Alana Weisberg writes, "Hi, I'm a member of the Node E, the A team. I
Nice.
dream of one day being employed by COC. Do I need to have been an athlete?"
No, you don't, Alana. Most of the, now I will, the COC, what I think, and I would need to confirm this, I think we're actually like this is unconfirmed. All right, I know this is being recorded. We are certainly one of the largest hirers in the world of Olympians. I think we've got, I should know the number, but I think there's like 15 of us on staff, so which is roughly 15% of our organization. Our games team, the people that focus on making the Olympics happen, working closely with sports day in and day out, there are, there's just a ton of Olympians on that team, and Paralympians as well. One thing that certainly does help if you're interested in working for the COC is, a deep passion for sport and the Olympic movement, but also just a willingness to roll up your sleeves and be ready for anything, because, the games are, they're massive, they're super exciting, and there's always curveballs.
And someone from the audience has asked you to clarify your role in Tokyo. You've told us something about how you're going to be confined and where your movement will be confined. You'll be working out of that media hub. What are you actually going to be doing?
Yeah, so my title at Games is press chief. So I'm managing the communications team, our press operations team, working with our spokespeople to provide interviews, working with them for press conferences, or ensuring that any key messaging is going to the places it needs to go, and effectively working with the team to tell the story of the games to Canadians and the rest of the world.
Okay, that's exciting. So you're heading off next week. What are you most looking forward to as you head there?
I mean, actually starting it, right? Like, that is exciting. It's going to be amazing to get these games started and to watch these athletes compete. I mean, I have this, sometimes it's really lucky that I'm an athlete, and other times I can just put myself in their shoes and just how stressful this moment of time is. And, so I will feel, empathic relief for them when they finally get to start competing. It's going to be a weight off my shoulders, but it's going to be super exciting. Going to the games in this role is new for me. It's going to be, I'm just pumped. The whole time is going to be fun. But, when you work this long at something and preparing all of these things, like I'm sure many in the audience can appreciate, from whether it's comms or anything else, the moment where you actually get to push play on it is always really exciting. And so that's where we are right now.
Well, that's amazing. I do need to wrap things up, unfortunately. The audience, I do want to thank our audience, though, for some really fantastic questions. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to all of them. I hope some of them seem to fit into some of the other things we were talking about. So hopefully people have mostly had their questions answered. I did want to mention, we had a note from Doug Wilton, who is involved with a rapid automated water testing technology that protects all open water athletes from dangerous bacteria like E. coli. Would the COC be interested in a small side story of how this Kingston, Ontario company is helping to protect its athletes in Tokyo? Yes, we'll hook you up, Tom.
Yeah, flip me an email. And, Anyway, my email is thall@olympic.ca. It's public. I'm the media content
Hall at
at
Sam.
olympic.ca.
Okay, Doug Wilton, your task is
Yeah.
to
Now I'm just gonna warn you. It's a busy time, so if I don't get back to you, I throw it out there. But please be patient. It is, we're a week away from hopping on a plane, and I have multiple tests between now and then that I have to pass. So.
Oh, I bet. So many people are thanking you very much for your insights, Tom. It's been really wonderful to have you. Before we wrap, I just need to take a moment to plug our upcoming programs through the Queen's Executive Education Program, as I always do. So if anyone is at home pining, wondering about using their time, what was the term? Glory. If you're at home thinking, I need to pursue more glory, here's your moment. So Coaching Remotely is an online program offered through Queen's Executive Education, August 17th. The Queen's Leadership Program is a very popular one that will for sure lead to glory. I have no doubts. So visit smithqueens.com/exec-ed for more information. I am sorry to tell you, audience, that was our last webinar for now until September. We'll be back with new content in September. I hope you'll stick with us. Keep your eyes on your inbox. We'll always be keeping you posted about new stuff that we're doing. In the meantime, if you're desperate for great business content, do check out Smith Business Insight online, and there's lots of articles, former webinars, other things you can check out to keep you going all summer long. Tom Hall, thank you for being so fantastic. On behalf of the university, on behalf of Smith School of Business, it's just really great to have you in our ranks. And thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And enjoy the games. I bet it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you so much. It's great.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Cheers,
enjoy
everyone.
the rest of the summer, and we'll see you in September. Bye.
Bye.